Coming up, I've got former Green Beret, constitutional attorney, and sort of police state investigator Ivan Raiklin. He's going to be right here in studio. We're going to talk about the second attempt to assassinate Trump, the implications of that, but also go beyond that to talk about the kind of the belly of the beast, what we need to know that we don't see from the police state. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Guys, some big things happening this week. Tomorrow or the next day, probably Wednesday, our movie tickets go up for sale. The website is vindicatingtrump.com. So, two things. It's really important to grab those tickets right away. And it's partly so you get in and you get the tickets, but it's also partly to send a message to the theaters that we want this movie in a lot of theaters. Currently, we have, I think, about 400 theaters lined up. We'll have a lot more added this week, but I want the movie to get to 1,000 theaters or more. And part of the way we do that is we send a signal to the theaters that, hey, there's an audience for this film. People want to rally behind Trump. They want to learn more about Trump. They want to see the kind of defense of Trump that this movie makes. The other thing is plan to go on opening weekend. Same reason. The whole film industry pays attention to opening weekend for a movie. And you could almost say that going opening weekend is worth like 5 times going any other day. So I know it's sometimes more convenient to go the next day or during the week, but if you can possibly go the weekend, we're talking about the last weekend of September 27, 28, 29. So those 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, grab your tickets for those days and let's make the movie a resounding success. Once again, it's the website, vindicatingtrump.com. You can also pre-order a copy of my book. The book's out the first week of October, but pre-order now so you're one of the first people to get a copy. Now, I recently interviewed Ivan Raiklin, and guess what? He decided to pop in on me. He's here. He's in studio. He was actually traveling in Texas, so he said, I can come in studio if you like. And the topics that he covers are really topics that require a little bit of depth. So Ivan is a former Green Beret. He's a constitutional lawyer. He's a kind of a police state investigator or sleuth. And he studies this at a level of detail that very few people do, which is why I think it's cool to probe this stuff. Follow him on X at Ivan Raiklin, Raiklin. His website is simply raiklin.com. Ivan, good to, we haven't met before, so it's good to have you here and good to have you in studio.
Thank you.
And you presented me with a t-shirt, which is pretty awesome.
The Deep State Marauders t-shirt.
The Deep State Marauders t-shirt. Well, I like the word marauders. It suggests a certain kind of ferocity. So
yes, I mean, a lot of people, younger people, don't even know what that means. At the end of the day, it's what a pirate does when they board a ship and loots it for its treasure, right?
Right.
But in this case, it's literally we, the people that are boarding the tyrannical government, if you will, the deep state, and we're trying to reclaim our constitutional rights. So that's the philosophy behind being a deep state marauder. And I know you've been one of them before I even knew what deep state marauding was or coined that term.
Well, in my old days, I'd have been happy to be like a deep state skeptic or a deep state critic because I thought of myself a little more in academic terms. I'm a deep state, more dissenter.
Docile.
Right. I'm raising a few points against the deep state, but now I kind of like more the raking him over the coals, the deep state arsonist, deep state marauder.
Whoa.
Yeah. So these are the, metaphorically, of course, but nevertheless. So anyway, let's actually, speaking of high crimes, let's talk about this second assassination attempt on Trump. I mean, this is, one is extreme, mm-hmm. 2 is now the limit, and who knows if it is the last one. Now, this one appears to have been launched by this rather shady Ukraine guy. but a guy who is not just an advocate of Ukraine, but rather somebody who has been trying to get people to sign up to go fight in Ukraine. I think a guy who sees himself as a soldier, not to mention a guy who seems to have some connections with the intelligence agencies. What do you make of the second assassination attempt based upon what we know so far?
Yeah, we know a little about what's going on, but based on the facts that you laid out, and I've seen some of the same reporting, is that at the tactical level, best case scenario, let me give you the range of what I think possibly is going on here. At the tactical kind of basic level, this guy was just, consuming so much of the media coming from essentially the enemy of the Constitution, whether it's the criminal news networks, the MSLSD, I call it, right? Or the fake book that's promoting the narrative of the regime, which is now being proven to be completely false. So he was duped into that system and was overcharged.
Just to be clear, you mean is it the Trump is an autocrat, Trump is a dictator,
It's the TDS crowd that's promulgating complete anger in order to benefit themselves, the police state, the national security state, in order to keep their unjust and corrupt power in place. So best case scenario for this gentleman, he was duped into that and was radicalized. But I think there's much more to that. When you look at it and kind of back up and look at it from a strategic perspective, when you look at the Ukraine connection, well, how did that all originate? I happened to serve in 2014 on the Ukraine crisis team in the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. And while I did my work there and saw all levels of intelligence to the highest levels of intelligence that our government collects, in addition to that, when I was not at work, I still observed what was going on through the open sources out there, whether it's the Twitters, the YouTubes at that time. And I observed not only U.S. media, but also Russian and Ukrainian media. And we could clearly see how John Brennan, his fingerprints at the time, the CIA director, his fingerprints were all over the coup d'etat that occurred in Ukraine. And then they installed Poroshenko into office. And as you start to peel that onion further and further, and then they tee up Joe Biden to kind of present to Petro Poroshenko that they need to go ahead and hire his son to be an advisor on Burisma, right? So that he can then advocate for the Biden criminal syndicate, right? Well, when you start to throw in those factors at the strategic level as it applies to Ukraine, and as, by the way, another data point many people miss is that the disinformation czarina, known as the disinformation diva that they try to promote, what was her name? Her Twitter is Wikipedia. She was going to be the disinformation government.
She was going to be
Nina Yankowicz.
Oh, that's right. Of course.
So
Yankovitz.
Nina Yankowicz was found to be at Zelensky campaign headquarters. What is she doing there? And then when you start to throw in the Vindman twin traitor brothers, and then now one of their the wives is on Twitter, basically on the borderline of advocating for further violence to go ahead and assassinate Trump.
Mocking the assassination attempt, saying something like, well, this time his ears didn't get blasted. Right.
And so when you incorporate all these little data, they appear to be disparate data points, it just starts to pile on to then create an analytic hypothesis that, is it possible that John Brennan's fingerprints are all over the incitement and instigation through the media that we referenced earlier, to then at a minimum incite folks like this gentleman to go ahead and assassinate Trump through basically a couple of layers of cutouts in the process? Or is it more to that than that? Is it possible that this guy is on the payroll of the CIA and then hiring folks to go ahead and fight the war against the Russians in Ukraine? We've seen evidence of this gentleman participating in that. So I know that was complex in some way, shape, or form there, but at the end of the day, I think that there's more to it than just a lone gunman Democrat that's disgruntled at Orange Man bad.
Well, I mean, it makes sense to me for the reason that, how does one, let's say I'm an ordinary guy and I'm really fired up about Ukraine, I want to give it to Putin. It's a long way for me to go from that, which is sitting in my basement or at home, raging about it, to saying, all right, I'm going to be a soldier for a foreign army, Ukraine. Not only that, but I'm going to urge other people to sign up militarily with you. I mean, how do you even go about that? This is an operation in a remote country in a war zone far away. Unless I was rather well connected in how to let's say my neighbor goes, hey, you know what? I'm up for it. I'm ready to sign up. What do I do? You would think this guy would need to have some information like, okay, well, these are the 3 steps you need to take. So again, I think what you're saying is that it has to be more sophisticated.
Yes. I'm being very diplomatic in my analysis, or very forgiving. I think I lean more towards this was more than even chance an inside job on the radicalization, if you will, of this individual.
The radicalization is
and
unquestionable.
It was more than even chance assessment that it was an inside job when Donald Trump is on a golf course and it's not publicized that he's going to be there, and all of a sudden this gentleman's right there at the right time, location. Luckily, he missed, right? So I think from 2 aspects, there's probably an inside job. Now, again, in order to test that hypothesis, we need a lot more evidence to be more confident in that assessment. But right now, that's kind of where I stand.
In a way, I think that the reason this kind of inquiry is essential is because I even had similar questions with the first assassination attempt. The first assassination attempt was eerie in the comprehensiveness of the incompetence. In other words, I expect government to be incompetent, right? The post office is incompetent, the DMV is incompetent. In fact, I saw one of these comedians the other day basically saying, well, yeah, obviously that assassination attempt was a government operation because look how badly it was run. But I think you and I know that if you see incompetence at one level, you're like, all right. But if you see it over here and over here and over here and over here, you begin to wonder, this is a little too much, right? In other words, we're not just talking about the fact that that guy Crooks, right, the shooter, has drones and apparently the Secret Service doesn't. We're not talking about the fact that this is the closest roof to Trump and yet it's apparently unguarded. We're not talking about the fact that there are overweight and short DEI women supposedly guarding Trump. I mean, okay, we have all that, but it goes to the next level.
Didn't earn it.
Yeah, didn't earn it. Yeah, exactly. How do I put my gun back in my holster? I mean, we had all that, right? So you can laugh about it.
I'm laughing. It's embarrassing. I'm laughing because I'm embarrassed completely. Yeah. To quote Dan Bongino when he was testifying at a forum a couple weeks ago, specifically about July 13th, I can't remember the exact quote, but to summarize it, it was, you can tell intent based on actions and based on inactions. So what you're laying out with the constant, you can see the deliberate nature that all these mistakes at some point reaches the threshold. These were deliberate decisions that were made in order to create the overwhelming risk to
this is what
Donald
I'm getting
Trump.
at. Yes,
And
like the
there was
DEI.
intent.
You know that they've been pushing this DEI. So if it was just that, I would be like, look, this is DEI coming home to roost. But then when you add in to me the creepiest elements are a bunch of people on the grounds see the guy on the roof, with a backpack. And they alert the cops, and so you think the very first thing that should happen is seconds later, Trump is led right off the stage.
Get on your communications platform. Hey, Secret Service.
Get him out of there.
We have a very suspicious individual, potentially armed. Please secure the president.
Right. And that's right.
It gives them a little standoff, a little bit of time. Okay. 5 minutes later, he's back on stage speaking. And in those 5 minutes, they either detain or neutralize the threat.
And then the final element, and I don't know if you observed this, but I think I'm right in saying this. If you look at the guy who took out Crooks, that guy appears to have his weapon completely pointed at the guy. In other words, he knows Crooks is there. He sees him. His gun is pointed at him. And not only does he let Crooks get off one shot, but multiple shots, and then boom, he gets him. But that to me raises a question, and it's only a question, but it's a very sobering question. Is were they waiting for, like, okay, listen, we're going to let him take his shots, and then we're going to take him out because dead men don't tell any tales.
Correct.
Right? I mean, that has to cross your mind. And so you have 2 assassination attempts. and both of them generating questions of this sort. And so if you were Trump, wouldn't you now be having some meetings with your inner circle to say, hey,
if President Trump is listening to it or us right now, Dinesh, I would tell him a 10-second quote or a statement, and it would sound something like this: bring in the adults into the room. Stop being a candidate, act like a president. Bring in Eric Prince for your security assessment, and bring in General Flynn to advise you every day moving forward on the national security apparatus that is behind putting risk inside of your home and everywhere you travel. That would be my statement, and I'm going to repeat that until that happens.
Let's take a pause. Right back with Ivan Raiklin. Did you know there's nearly $1 trillion of infrastructure and pandemic funds yet to be spent? That's right. There's a massive amount of money that the lame duck administration is pushing hard to spend in the last few months. If the president is able to push these funds out, we could see another prolonged inflation surge, just like during COVID. I'm sure you remember the terrible effects that high prices had on most Americans. But there's hope. A surge in prices can be beaten. A gold IRA from Birch Gold Group can be an inflation hedge for your savings in uncertain times. To see how to protect your IRA or 401k, get your free information kit on gold by texting the word Dinesh to 989898. Birch Gold makes it seamless to roll over your retirement account while preserving your tax advantage status. Do what Debbie and I have done. Don't wait for the president's spending spree to tank the dollar further. Protect your financial future now. Text Dinesh to 989898 for your free information kit from Birch Gold. The radical left is working overtime to gain control of the Supreme Court. They want to end lifetime tenure so they can end the court's conservative majority. Remember when Hugo Chavez reformed Venezuela's Supreme Court? Debbie and I have had this discussion many times when she warned me about Hugo's destruction of Venezuela. He never lost a ruling or an election, and packing the court ensured Venezuela would never be a capitalist country again. Now, more than a decade after his death, Venezuela is still in total chaos. We can't let that happen here. If we lose the court, we lose the country. That's why my friends at First Liberty are fighting to save the court. To win the fight, they need 1 million patriots like you to join them. Learn more at Supreme Coup, supremecoup.com/Dinesh. I'm back with police state sleuth Ivan Raiklin. His website, Raiklin.com. Follow him on X at Ivan Raiklin. Ivan, we're talking about the second assassination attempt. And did you notice, by the way, that, and someone captured this in real time on Meta, is you've got the social media feed of the shooter, and then boom, it's gone, wiped clean. Mm-hmm. So we now see this strange phenomenon where, and if it was Meta,
also on X,
on X as well. Although there are a lot of people who have captured a lot of screenshots, and so they tried to, and even with this guy, I saw that Time Magazine said, he is a man of uncertain ideology. But of course, the nice thing about X these days is, boom, community notes. Right away, the time gets zapped. So you can't get away with this kind of nonsense anymore. But they also tried it with crooks. They were trying to escape responsibility. And let's remember that this is a case where it's not just Kamala Harris and Biden. The media bears a lot of responsibility for poisoning the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So it's highly in the interest of the media to hide the Trump derangement syndrome on the part of these people.
Because their credibility every day just lowers and lowers. And the credibility of the users and the community notes of X only increases.
Yeah, exactly. So let's explore this broader phenomenon, which is to say, there have been now 2 assassination attempts, and from the media's point of view, it's not really a big story. In other words, it is not the massive headline. And that tells me something, because when I think back, let's say to Reagan, John Hinckley makes an attempt on Reagan's life. If you look at the newspapers the next day, it's in huge type across the headline. Mm-hmm. No one denies that this is a massive story. And that was after Reagan was elected. Here you have, in a sense, democracy in the balance, because you've got 2 candidates. One of them is going to be president of the United States, and someone is trying to take out one of the two candidates, which is to say to it, talk about an attack on democracy. And yet it is subdued. It is, when it came up in the debate, this was the first assassination attempt. David Muir was almost like, well, we don't have time for this. Let's move on. They don't want to focus on...
absolute cover-up. So I'm going to say that, let's look back at the arc of history of American politics.
Yeah.
You have Abraham Lincoln, assassination attempt, successful. We have John F. Kennedy, assassination attempt, successful. Donald Trump has already had two of those, which equates to those two massively impactful assassination attempts within our political history, right, in the nation. So the other thing that the media fails to report on is, the very first time and only time in American history that a person that was unarmed and peaceful was murdered and gunned down and slaughtered inside of the United States Capitol. The media does not cover that. And I'm referring to Ashley Babbitt, right? Or Roseanne Boylan, which was beaten and bludgeoned and murdered, basically, by a Metropolitan Police officer outside of the United States Capitol. I believe also, at least on the inside, it was the only time in American history. That's pretty consequential, right? A person exercising their First Amendment, yeah, maybe they were improperly trespassing, but you don't murder someone for it. And so they just continue. This is just another example of them covering it up. And that's why I think it's as kind of leaders in the national discourse, particularly you, I think it's incumbent on us to start ignoring what we used to consider as legacy mainstream media, not even give them the title or reference them, because it's basically giving credence and credibility to a 2-year-old for reporting on something, or a single-digit IQ individual. We need to raise the bar by continue to embarrass them so that those consumers out there clearly realize that the information that we are presenting is of much more authority, much more credibility, and that's how we off-gas those individuals that are on fake book, that are on Insta-garbage, or consuming what was the all bad commies, right? ABC, I think you called them, right? We need to pull them off. And that's how we bankrupt those institutions. And that's the peaceful way to punish them.
I think that the problem is even worse than that in a sense, because these guys are, they're not 2-year-olds. A lot of them are smart. They're well educated. A couple of them are friends of mine. David Frum.
What?
Well, David.
I'm ending my interview.
Well, let's look at, here. Well, ex-friends is maybe a better expression. Okay. But to give you an idea, right after the first Trump assassination, David Frum writes this explosive article in The Atlantic, basically blaming for the assassination Trump. He goes, Trump's responsible.
Yeah, the same.
Because Trump puts out this poisonous rhetoric, and guess what? This is like a blowback. It's coming back to haunt him. Now, David
the same
Frum,
outfit that said nothing but chumps, right? Total lie.
So these, but I'm saying, what I'm getting at is David Frum is he's not an unintelligent guy. It's just that he has, from my point of view, kind of gone over to the dark side. And I'm sure he thinks the same of me, by the way. He's probably thinking, well, Dinesh, you were at AEI, why aren't you a never-Trumper who is like endorsing Kamala Harris? The way I just saw, did you see that George Will just endorsed?
I couldn't believe
No, George Will is maybe like 95 years old. And George Will has always
He's
been,
still around?
Honestly, he's always been a snake. He was a snake in the old days, although it was less visible to conservatives. But if you watched him, I once wrote an article on him for Policy Review, and I noticed something very sly about George Will, which is this: he was a columnist for the Washington Post, and I only mention this, by the way. It's not about George Will per se, but it's a profile in sellout. It's a profile in opportunism. Mm-hmm. So how does George Will maintain his bona fides with the left? And this was his strategy, and it was a brilliant strategy. He would let's just take the 10, kind of conservative issues of the Reagan era. Mm-hmm. The conservative court, taxes, privatization. But there was typically going to be one issue that the left cared about the most. Let's say, for example, it was the Reagan tax cuts. The one thing that they did not want to go through was the Reagan tax cuts. Mm-hmm. So what George Will would do is he would sell out on that issue. The issue that is critically important to the left, George Will would come out for higher taxes and against Reagan. But on every other issue, on the other 9, he would be solidly conservative. So think about it. Think of how devious it is to be hurting us on the one issue that is at the forefront.
Right. I like how you framed it. Profile of opportunism, right?
Right.
And I think that's best case scenario, right? You can say the same thing about the Mitt Romneys, the Lizzie Cheneys, the Adam Kinzinger. I just found out that he lives down the road now, right? The crybaby Kinzingers of the world. Is it opportunism or is it something more nefarious? My research and sleuthness, as you call it, leads me to believe it's more than just opportunism.
And what is the more to it? Because, see, I think it's a mixture of careerism and fear. And
there
what
may
I mean,
be an element of there's some leverage in their lifestyle and background that causes them to appear as though they're good faith actors. Meanwhile, they are bad faith actors behind the scenes because there's a certain sort of leverage that they have to kind of give a little bit in order to stay under the radar.
Are you implying
that
sort
national
of
security apparatus?
Are you implying like blackmail, or they may be owned in some way, and
Absolutely.
so
that's why they have to be a limited hangout, if you will, in their own right, wherever their brand has been created from, whether it's on the right or on the left.
Well,
because I think George Will always coined himself as kind of more of a moderate or an independent thinker. When he was, I believe he was his last assignment was on Phone News, right?
Well, I mean, no, he used to be in the old days on ABC. He was on in the mornings. He was frequently on one of those, either Meet the Press or Face the Nation, whatever the ABC show was. He had a lot of TV exposure, and he was often very good, which is why a lot of conservatives, me included, generally admired him. And it was only when I was assigned to sort of research him that I noticed this strange pattern. That, if the left then suddenly starts, like right now there's a big, let's just say, abortion decision coming up. Well, George Will, who is generally pro-life, would figure out some constitutional reason why the left is right on this one, and he'd sell out right there on the edge of the precipice. And then on all the issues that didn't really matter, we need to have prayer in schools, we need to have the 10 Commandments posted in every classroom. But it begs the question.
You found that out when you started digging and researching, which then I think that our entire lives, this same methodology was there. We just didn't know. Like, we just didn't dig enough. So maybe that's the case for the whole career that he's presented to us, right?
Well, I mean, this is a good point. And I think for me, it's been eye-opening because in my early career, I thought of politics as almost like a debating society. Here are the Democrats, here are the Republicans,
I thought the same thing.
Right? We have this big argument. We put these rival ideals before the American people. They decide to go this way or that way, and sometimes the pendulum swings. I think one of the things that the Trump era has uncovered is the sort of deep and dark motives that drive so many people, even people that are right in front of us. I don't just mean, when people say the deep state, you think of like curtains drawn, lights out, the deep state, no one can see what's happening. But there are a lot of people operating in plain sight, journalists, judges, and these are people who are doing their thing in front of us. But what we don't see, of course, is what's happening behind the scenes. So, for example, Alvin Bragg. What happens when Alvin Bragg says adjourned? Right? Who's on the phone with him?
Right, exactly.
What conversations occur?
With?
That's right. Are there people who say, do his friends text him and go, "Nice one, Alvin, you got him this time," and he goes, "Yup." What's the rest of the story? We don't get it. Now, one of the funny things I should tell you in our movie Vindicating Trump is we create these, it's a recreation, but we create these war rooms. We have the media war room, we have the intelligence war room, we have the DNC war room, and it gives people, because a lot of us think that what happens in those places. So we show you in the movie, Trump is getting convicted, guilty, guilty, guilty. Well, what's going on at ABC News? Are those guys like just watching it? Are they objective journalists who go, "We need to cover this"? Or are they high-fiving each other? Are they laughing? Are they opening the champagne? What is the full picture of American politics? What is going on
I think it has
below
to be,
the tip of the iceberg?
I think it has to be deliberate planning in order to increase the bottom line, right? Create such sensational content that keeps your power and increases your power with your other cronies and make money off of it. I mean, we saw that with the whole COVID con from 2020 with the lockdowns. The way I see it is that the COVID relief package that Nancy Pelosi penned with no quorum whatsoever to pass these bills, by the way, unconstitutionally passed. What were they? I see them as a massive, at global scale, basically bribe to those that participated in the 2020 electoral heist. It was literally, hey, thanks for closing your businesses down. Now we're going to approve you for all these loans that we're never going to audit and you're never going to have to pay back. But good job. Thanks for stealing the election with Mark Zuckerberg, with his assets, and all the other fraud that you've exposed through 2,000 Mules, as well as other mechanisms that they used. And this is such generational, incestuous corruption that you said that a debate. The Trump era has exposed that this is a cognitive war at a minimum. They're trying to bring it into a massive kinetic civil war. We're trying to make sure that it remains out of that state and stays within the cognitive space. And as long as we have free speech, we will completely dominate in that space. The only way that they survive is through massive censorship. And we're not going to let it happen.
Right back with Ivan Raiklin. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing ShareRight. It's healthcare done the right way. At ShareRight, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. With ShareRight, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. So think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. ShareRight ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With ShareRight, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today by taking control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. You asked and MyPillow listened. They're finally bringing you the most requested offer ever. Right now, you can get the queen size premium MyPillow for only $19.98. MyPillow is made with patented adjustable fill. It adjusts to your exact individual needs, regardless of your sleep position. It helps keep your neck aligned and holds its shape all night long, so you get the best sleep of your life. But that's not all. There are good deals all around. Get the 6-piece kitchen or bath towel sets, just $25. The brand new mattress topper, as low as $69.98. The famous MyPillow bed sheets, as low as $25, and there is a lot more. Call 800-876-0227, the number again, 800-876-0227, or go to MyPillow.com. When you use promo code Dinesh, you get big discounts on all the MyPillow products, including the premium queen size MyPillow, only $19.98. That's the lowest price ever, so don't delay. Order today. Go to MyPillow.com, and don't forget to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh. I'm back in studio with Ivan Raiklin. Follow him on X at Ivan Raiklin, his website, raiklin.com. You said something, Ivan, at the end of the last segment, which is, I think, very interesting and important. And that is that inside of these institutions of American society, whether it be academia or the law, there are powerful vested interests that figure out ways to divert large amounts of money into your industry. It's almost like you think, for example, of just a normal legal case. So there's one set of lawyers over here, and there's one set of lawyers over here, and if it's an arbitration, you have a retired judge who is getting paid by the hour for his participation. So he too is part of that legal system. He too went to the same law schools. He came up as a lawyer. He was probably himself a prosecutor or a defense lawyer. If he was a prosecutor, he's now a judge, and now he's retired as a judge. And here's what I'm getting at. For them, it is in their interest to keep the dispute going.
Yes.
Because if they resolve the dispute, they make it really simple, then all the parties leave, and then there's a small pot of money to share. But if they keep it going, let's say they can extend the legal quarrel.
Why solve the problem?
Why solve the problem?
Because when you do, then there's no paycheck.
And now apply that same reasoning beyond the law to the medical community. Because I remember when I was younger, people would say things like, Dinesh, they found a cure for cancer, but they're not letting on. And I would say, that's ridiculous. Because I would think if somebody has found a cure for cancer, that guy is going to patent it, right? And he's going to develop some cancer drugs, and he's going to become a billionaire. So there's a market reason to want to put the cure out. But then I think to myself, and in fact, a friend of ours, Debbie's and mine, who lives in fact in our neighborhood, his wife got cancer, right? And they tried all kinds of stuff. Eventually she passed away. But he said something very striking to me that I remember, and that is, he said, when you walk into one of these cancer centers, he says, guess what they see? You walk in as a cancer patient, but they see stamped on your head, on your forehead, $1 million. Because that's what you are worth to them. Not your money, because you may not have $1 million. But whether it's insurance, whether it's government reimbursements, you're $1 million to them. And so they don't want that cancer to go away. If cancer disappeared overnight, and then every cancer patient worth $1 million is gone, think of the blow that the medical industry suffers. So what I'm saying is, I think we're now coming to the realization that all these institutions run in this manner.
Right now, we have a new line of medical product that can probably result in more like 2 to 3 million over the lifetime of an individual, which is the castration, the mutilation, and then promoting, hey, in order to maintain your mental stability, now that we've promoted your castration and maiming you.
Oh, psychological
children,
treatments, right?
Then we're going to go ahead and give you these chemical drugs so that it maintains your stability so you don't commit suicide.
And then look at, this is another thing.
That's if you survive the child murder in the womb, child murder at birth, and then child murder they're basically advocating after birth in some of these states.
And then you look around and you see all these Americans who are like 300 pounds, right? All walking around. And I say to myself, first of all, this is not a worldwide problem. You don't see it in Italy. You don't see it in France. Why is that? Well, the food over there appears to be a lot fresher. Now, we have an FDA, but our FDA doesn't seem to be particularly concerned that you have these Americans who are jeopardizing their health by reaching not just he's a little overweight, we're talking about morbid obesity.
Right.
But then comes the solution, which is
you can't
injection.
say those terms, Dinesh, morbid obese. That's just so offensive to them.
That is true.
You can't tell the truth because it hurts.
Well, but where I'm going with this is not the political correctness issue. It's this. Then they'll come along with the remedy, whether it's Ozempic. It's something like this, right? Pills that you take.
So they make money on both ends. Those that brought to you by on whatever news organization that we just talked about that are worthless. The advertisers are buying off the ad time to sell the food that then creates these conditions of obesity. And then now on the other end, they're like, hey, take this other thing in order to be able to address your morbid obesity that causes every known, issue.
Right. And then pretty soon you're covered, and the government is paying for the Ozempic. And so a massive new program is now created to stabilize all these sort of 300-pounders.
Meanwhile, the Speaker of the House being the most powerful person on the planet, because they get to decide over the course of the 2 years of being a Speaker of the House, $6+ trillion a year for 2 years, about $12 trillion that they get to control into the global economy and the global budget.
So what do you make of
Nancy Pelosi definitely leveraged that ability very well in the 117th Congress.
She used that power, as Democrats do, in the democratic fashion, right? Now, in other words, she used it to do the kind of big spending, the dependency that Democrats have politically been pursuing since FDR. Here's my question to you. What do you make of a Mike Johnson? What do you make of the Republicans? Because Republicans are supposed to be the party of restraint. And if Mike Johnson is in a position to say, sorry, that bill just doesn't even get out the gate. He can do that. But he doesn't do that. Now, there are some people who say, and I've never really gone along with this, at least not all the way, that's because, Dinesh, we have a uniparty and it's all the same party. But truly, if we had a uniparty like that, our situation would be close to hopeless, right? Because we have no third party. We have no way to. So I at least have at least some hope that it is not at that stage. But there has to be some form of Republican complicity, quite clearly, because Republicans appear not to be applying the brake that is available to them. If the brake is not available, I'm like, okay, you did what you could. But when you're in the car, you're in the driver's seat, the brake is right there, you don't use it, I then go, what's up?
You just presented a great opportunity for me to provide you a solution to the key issues that we just discussed from the very beginning of this episode. In order to mitigate the threat on President Trump, in order to increase our ability to go after all of these scum, I recommend that Congressman Bob Good from Virginia go ahead and file a motion to vacate Mr. Johnson. Because at the end of the day, he hasn't really produced much. He's been in office the same period of time as Mr. Kevin McCarthy, which was he provided cover for the January 6th videotapes, right? I would give a D- right now to Mr. Johnson because the only thing that he's done is spend to provide more money to Ukraine to then create these individuals that are weaponized against Donald Trump, right? Et cetera, et cetera.
Funded a new FBI building.
Exactly. So we need to remove Mike Johnson, and then in the same sentence, basically, Bob Good needs to go ahead and, after his motion to vacate the chair, nominate President Trump as Speaker of the House. Here's what this does. It now then puts security responsibility on Speaker Trump on the sergeant at arms that the speaker himself, Trump, can appoint, and the entire staff. And it doesn't rely on Mayorkas's DHS Secret Service to put him in a vulnerable position. In addition to that, he can then enlist and subcontract out an additional layer of security for candidate, president, Speaker of the House, Trump, and delegate that out to Eric Prince. So I think that is the immediate fix and solution that we can have as early as literally tomorrow or Wednesday, because a motion to vacate is a privileged motion. We saw that being conducted by Matt Gaetz, and I think Bob Good is probably the most favored individual to do so because he's still currently the chair of the House Freedom Caucus. I get it that he lost his primary race, but I think it really would put people and Americans on notice to see where the Republican conference stands. Because imagine if that happens and we see a Republican say, no, we're not going to vote for Donald Trump to be the Speaker of the House. What can we do in response? We can guarantee that that Republican loses their seat in November.
I mean, this is kind of wild because when you started talking, I thought you meant let's wait for the election to be over. Let's hope the Republicans have hold
we have
of the
to
House.
fix things now.
You're saying that this
second
is
assassination attempt. This should be this week. This discussion should be this week.
So this is but I mean,
and it protects them into the election.
Yeah. I do think
and beyond up to January 3rd. I apologize.
No. I mentioned earlier that when the media downplays these assassination attempts, well, guess who else downplays them? The Republicans.
Yes,
because where are the Republican senators on the floor screaming about this? One or two are going to talk about it. I saw Darrell Issa's like enough is enough, and maybe Josh Hawley over here and there. But these are isolated. This does not reflect the mainstream, because otherwise you'd have 200 Republicans in the House and about 50 in the Senate, all screaming for immediate action. And screaming that this is an attack on democracy, which it is.
They can bark all they want, but I think the substantive reaction, response, and conduct is I just presented it, right? They have the authority to go ahead and remove the current Speaker of the House and put someone in there. And what this provides, it's a level of security that currently doesn't exist for President Trump. In addition, I think that, I'm in Texas, right? Another layer to this is Elon Musk just moved Twitter headquarters from California to Texas, and I think that is now the platform of choice to kind of push out the truth. So it'd be nice to see Elon Musk maybe working with, at least in the time that he's still in there, Mike Johnson, to come up with a method to expose the deep state at scale that you have been kind of exposing at a smaller scale because we don't have the platform that Elon Musk does, and then take it to that next level, taking the Twitter files that he's already put out, amplifying it to the level of now that he's endorsed President Trump, and just basically say, you know what, I'm going to go open kimono on everything within Twitter Holdings to include people that were former Kamala Harris employees that worked at Twitter. We're going to look at their communications to show to America, in the interest of transparency, who these people are. We're going to showcase how corrupt the FBI is, because one of his employees that he fired immediately when he learned about it, Elon Musk fired Jim Baker, who was the deputy general counsel. Before that, he was the general counsel at the FBI that went ahead and launched the Crossfire Hurricane illegal spying operation. So I think the Speaker Trump component, as well as the Elon, what I call the mother of all Twitter files component, where it educates without censorship the American public of what occurred to us collectively over the last 6-8 years, and then naming those individuals by name, date, place, and transgression with communications to support that evidence, it becomes so explosive that you have a bubble of protection for Trump and a public opinion that moves from TDS to literally TRS, meaning from Trump derangement syndrome to, now that they're woken up, to Trump reinstatement syndrome, because now they see the same enemy that you and I know, which is the deep state, what Tucker calls as permanent Washington. These are incestuously corrupt at the generational level, at the core individuals. And the only way we can prove that to America is circumvent the censorship and then push it out at scale. And really the only 2-3 people that I see that can immediately do that before the election: Elon Musk, the Attorney General Ken Paxton, and many people don't realize there's a committee in the state of Texas known as the State Affairs Committee, chaired by State Senator Brian Hughes, that has jurisdiction over this sort of conversation. And if those 3 people kind of leverage the maximum discretionary authority that they have legally, morally, and ethically, then this could happen in a mere days, which will start to impact early voting in states such as Pennsylvania. Early voting started today. Some other states like Vermont, etc., starts on later this week on Friday. And so in those states that have Democrat-controlled legislatures, we still need to use the traditional mechanisms of converting the psyche of those voters to then make a conscious, deliberate decision on who they vote for, which is the court of public opinion. And then in those states that are Republican majority legislatures, we can do that, as well as advocate for, I argue that we need to have a backstop to autocorrect the constitutional crisis that we're in. And we need to go back to the original way in which states allocated their presidential and vice presidential electors, which is the state legislature on November 5th can go ahead and convene, vote, live streamed on X, Rumble, on C-SPAN, on Twitter, right? Or excuse me, on Truth. And then we can see how these state reps and state senators will vote live. And if they vote by political party, Republicans control currently 274 electoral votes, which is above the 270 threshold. So that is, I think, those are the kind of 2 solutions that I present.
Let's come back for a final segment with Ivan Raiklin and explore this. We'll be right back. I'm back with Ivan Raiklin. So Ivan, I think what you're saying is that what we need, and my question to you is this, we're looking to sway independent voters who don't pay too much attention to politics, are just kind of, they drop in for the debates, they hear about this, they hear about that, they're very impressionistic. I don't like the way Kamala laughs, Trump appears to be a tough guy, this kind of thing. What you're saying is, give them a dose of something that they don't expect about their government, which is, I mean, your phrase was, raise the kimono. But you're saying Elon Musk can start, because why? He happens to control one of the digital platforms. So all he needs to do is, to change the metaphor, pop the hood.
Yes.
And we can all look inside and, see what Vijay Agade was up to in the legal department, and Yoel Roth in the trust and safety division.
And her deputy, Jim Baker. Yes.
Jim Baker. See what they're in the internal communicate. Now, they're going to all scream, but who cares? Show it, you're saying, to the world.
Yes.
Because probably what was going on in Twitter in 2020 was exactly the same thing that not only was going on, but is going on at Google, at YouTube,
Full stop.
At Meta,
Full
at Instagram,
stop.
Right?
And Mark Zuckerberg even admitted to it, right?
Right.
So now the same people at the White House and at the Department of Justice and the FBI and CISA at DHS and the Office of Director of National Intelligence will be exposed, because those are the same individuals that coordinated through that censorship portal to all of big tech. But Elon, because he was never part of that, so there's no legal risk to him and his new team that he brought in. The risk is all on the shoulders of Twitter 1.0. The other companies can't do that, because then they collapse individually. Like their survivability is lost. He is the only person uniquely positioned to go ahead with no risk to himself, only upside to release this. And the upside is this. Since he's all in for Trump, if he doesn't do this, he risks a loss by Trump, and thus he's done as a businessman. They will destroy him. And then number two, it's the only social media company that had such a senior level official that came from the top levels of the deep state, Jim Baker. And so we can look at all of his communications, and it can be further legitimized and amplified in the governmental space by a Ken Paxton by issuing what's called a CID, or with Brian Hughes, I mentioned, with the state Senate. They could issue a press release or subpoena and then put out some of this content in public as a legislative body through a hearing where they would call in Jim Baker, Vijaya, Yoel, and other former Kamala Harris, well, those that worked at Twitter that later worked for Kamala Harris or did work for Kamala Harris when she was in the Senate as a U.S. Senator from California, or when she was the Attorney General or the District Attorney, I believe, in San Francisco. So all of this incestuous generational rot, when you start to go from deep state to the National Security Division or the FBI to the individuals by name, date, place, and transgression, you start to clearly see that they're all motivated by follow the science that starts with the dollar sign, right? Money. And then all that corruption is further exposed. That's why, they've investigated me over 20 times across DOJ, DHS, DOD, found nothing, attempted several entrapments of me, but I was able to kind of nip it in the bud. And so their only option to people like us is through censorship. And I don't know about others, but when you censor me or you try to deploy people to attack me, it starts to trigger my inherent right to self-defense. And that's in the digital space, and then ultimately, if it comes down to it, in the physical space. And so we're only going to continue to escalate the truth as they attack us, and they're not going to win. I mean, in the game of chicken, I always say this. There are two options if I'm playing. I either win or you're going to lose. And so they're not going to win, not on my watch.
Another point I've found is that, oddly enough, because sometimes people will say, and they probably say something similar to you, is they say, I want to thank you, Dinesh, because you're on the front line, and I think to myself, well, it's actually safest on the front line. By that I mean that let's just take my film. It's out there. I'm going to push it into a lot of theaters. So let's say they try to cancel the film. It's hardest to cancel because it's so out front. It's so visible. It's so obvious that they're going to have to try to think of other ways to try to figure out how to block it. Maybe we can convince Netflix not to do this, or that kind of thing. Or
disrupt it, or try to do a Twitter space that I did a couple weeks ago, and all of a sudden it has DDoS attacks and I can't even do anything with it, right? Or I gave a speech, was trying to stream it on Rumble a couple days ago. The audio was in and out. And people are like, well, they've never seen this before. So that's the type of disruption that they're going to do, so that their fingerprints are not
hacking efforts on your website and this sort of thing that we've experienced more than once. Look, this is fascinating stuff, Ivan. And again, I told you last time we've touched the tip of the iceberg, and that's apparently the case now as well. However, I think we've covered some interesting ground in just giving people a sense that everything that we see about American politics is only a part of the full picture. And what you're saying, your general message today is we just need to see a lot more, because the more we see, the more as citizens will be alert to all these snakes in collusion who are there to take away our rights and ultimately take away our possessions. That's their goal, to their own benefit and their own enrichment. And the more we know about it, the better positioned we are to stop them.
Right. So I'm basically the current digital Paul Revere. Instead of saying that the British are coming, you and I are telling folks, hey, whether it's your movies with the exposing all these things down to the individual level, or whether it's the mother of all Twitter files, it's literally educating the court of public opinion that will ultimately be the jury pool that will be salivating to convict all of these scum.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.